I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also extend my respects to any elders joining us here today. Hi, my name is Kathy, and I'm joined by author Heather Morris to discuss her latest release, Stories of Hope. 2020 has been an exceptional year, and I think you will agree that finishing our author events focusing on hope is a nice way to end the year. Heather is best known for her best-selling novels, The Tattooist of Auschwitz and Cilka's Journey, both based on the lives of two survivors of the Holocaust, Lale Sokolov and Cecilia Cilka Klein, as told to Heather by Lale. In contrast, Stories of Hope is Heather's story. How did she gain the trust of Lale to tell his story? What can we learn from Heather's story? And how can we keep our stories alive? Welcome, Heather. Could we start by having a little bit of an introduction to the book? What's it about, and how did you come to write it?
Spent sitting in this tiny little apartment, and the owners of it were Mr. and Mrs. Samueli. They were 93 and 96, and they had been neighbours of Cilka for over 4 decades. Now, people in Slovakia don't have homes like we do. We don't sort of leave our parents and upsize, downsize, and I'm not even sure what I'm in at the moment. But over there in Slovakia, people were given an apartment, more often an apartment. A few of the bureaucrats may have got a home, but that was theirs for life. Well, didn't that work out well for me? Because it meant that the people who I know in Slovakia, in Lale's hometown of Krompaki, had found the apartment building where Cilka had lived. This is quite a long-winded way of how stories came about, isn't it? Sitting in this apartment, and throughout the day, anywhere between 6 and 20 other people were in that apartment with me. They were the friends and the neighbours of Cilka. They all knew that this crazy lady from Australia was coming, and she wanted to talk to them about Cecilia, because they only ever knew her as Cecilia. And they couldn't wait to share their stories. And I sat there for hours as they came and went. Now, I don't speak any Slovakian other than to say "Ďakujem," which is thank you. And they didn't speak any English. I did have 2 translators there with me. They're off to the side, and they're there to ask my questions and then to feed back a little bit of the answers they're hearing and to make some notes. Now, here's the second night. Had dinner in the hotel with Margaret, and we're about to go to our room, and we walked past the staircase that went down. We went, oh, should we go and have a look? What's down there? And we wandered down there, and we found this little dungeon of a bar. So we thought, well, we'd have a coffee and a port before we went to bed. Well, we actually got kicked out at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they closed at 12. Everyone else had gone home, but they didn't quite know how to get rid of these 2 sort of Kiwi ladies who seemed quite happy to sit there and talk all night and drink their port. But Margaret made the comment to me there. She said, I have been sitting for 2 days watching you engage with perfect strangers, watching these perfect strangers open up and share with you not only what they knew about Cilka, but wanting to tell you about their lives as well. And I went, because to me that wasn't unusual. But to her, she said, watching from the sidelines, she said, it is unusual. That doesn't happen to most people. She said, when I asked a question, they kind of looked at me and then just ignored me. What is it that makes people happy to tell you their story? And I said, well, you just listen, don't you? It's not rocket science. She said, well, but I was listening, but I wasn't having that same engagement. And I said, you weren't listening to the point that they could see that you were listening. You were probably taking notes, and you were probably looking distracted occasionally. She said, well, how did you know not to do that? And I said, very simply, my great-grandfather Gramps, he lived 2 paddocks away from me in rural New Zealand where I grew up. And I shared with her some of the things I share in the book of how this amazing old man gravitated to me, the only girl with 4 brothers in the family, as I say, 2, they're actually orchards away, and how he became the most central adult in my life. Not my parents, not my grandparents, but my great-grandfather. And for several years, I came every day after school and sat with him on his veranda out the back. And he told me the story of his life. and he told me how to hear and listen to what he was saying. He told me how to listen to the world around us, how to just try and identify the sound of that tractor I could hear. Who's the owner? Which farm's that coming from? Which dog is it that's barking as it's rounding up the cows to take them into milking? Can you guess which one of your brothers your mother's yelling at? These are the things this amazing old man taught me as a child, the only adult in my life who listened to me and spoke to me. And I've come to the realization that, it really doesn't matter if you only have one person in your life when you're growing up who fulfills that role, because one is enough when it is as beautiful and loving as my relationship with my great-grandfather. And that's when Margaret said, "You've got to write a book." Okay.
And I'm glad that you did, because it really does. It's something that we think that we do. We think that we listen. And a lot of the time we're just listening to respond to what somebody's saying instead of actually listening to what they're trying to tell us. And it comes across really loud and clear in your book that's a very key message with it. And Lale I was going to say, Lale wasn't the first person that you entrusted. Did any of your other family have any influence on how you learned to listen or not learn to listen?
I'll probably not learn to listen. I learned to shut out all the noise that was going on in my household with four brothers. Why wouldn't you? But it wasn't just Lale. I spent 20 years working in the social work department of a big hospital here in Melbourne. Now, trust me, every day the people who I met, many of them woke up that morning not knowing that they would then be meeting me later in the day, as they found themselves at a hospital, either the patient or the family member of somebody who something tragic or traumatic had happened to. And I was there, of course, to listen to him. They didn't come to hear me talk, but to listen to me, or to have me listen to them while they shared whatever had brought them there, and to see how I could help them. So listening is what I've kind of practiced. And you touched on it about how we listen to respond. It's called conversation, folks, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's what makes the world go round, conversation. But occasionally, every now and then, if you're with somebody, you know that there's some part or some time in their life that you've heard just little snippets, little vignettes of something remarkable or extraordinary, and you want to know more about it. Well, find a way to ask them. And in the book, I give you a few tips, by the way, whether it's somebody who's elderly or a child, a friend or family. And they're very basic, simple little things to engage in, to be able to talk to someone. Not talk to somebody, listen to somebody.
Yeah, and I would imagine those tips are probably something that anyone starting out in aged care or childcare would kind of go, oh, okay, I can give that a try. But possibly also too is that that's some things that they're already doing, but maybe we just don't recognize it so much in our world because they are quite separate as well. So could you tell us a little bit about Lale and your friendship and how it evolved?
Well, yeah, look, there's three reasons why we wrote the book. I've told you one. The second is because the more I go around the world talking to people, and oh gosh, I wish I was there with you. I'm happy to do this, looking at this tiny little pinhole in the top of my computer here, but I'd much rather be with you. But it became really obvious in the last 12 to 18 months when I was talking at live events that the people there did not want to hear me talk about the book. They'd read the book, move on, tell us something we don't know, please. And so they wanted to know about my relationship with Lale. Yeah, that kind of surprised me initially. Really? You want to know about that? But yeah, that includes me. This is not about me. Because it was one thing I'm certain of. This may be my book, but they're not my stories. But yeah, apparently you guys want to know about it. So here's my chance to now put it in writing and to tell you about all those crazy moments that he and I had over a 3-year period up until the day he died. How, well, I describe him as this cheeky, chumming bugger. He was one of the biggest flirts I've ever met. He could charm, and he did charm everybody that he met. He had a wicked sense of humour. But of course, when I first met him, he didn't have that. He was grieving for Gita. And it took many months as he got to know me and got to know my family. And I share with you the tip of how I decided I needed to just break through more with him, because he was telling me his story clinically and factually. Every now and then he'd start to tell me something and he'd stop and his head would go down and he'd just move on. And so I knew there was more there. Well, how do you get somebody to trust you? Well, in my case, it was introduce them to my family. 3 young adult children, my youngest, an 18-year-old girl, who he immediately took a shine to. And I found him flirting with her within an hour of meeting her when he came for dinner. You know, I asked him on the way home, what was going on there, mate? What were you doing with my daughter? And he was, very pretty girl. And I went, carry on. She's the same age as Gita when I met her. And I went, oh, doing, yeah, come on, how insensitive. But look, for the next 2.5 or more years, he couldn't get enough of the daughter. But here's the thing, because on that drive home, I learned what he had learned from my children. I could have smacked them around the head as they told him every fault, every foible, everything about me, every bad thing that they could. What a lousy cook I was. All these things he now knew about me, and he thought it was wonderful. You're just an ordinary person like me, he would say. And I'd go, no, honey, I'm the ordinary one. You're the extraordinary one. But yeah, so that's what I share in the book, is some of the things that we got up to, going to the movies and the cafes, and when he re-engaged with the Jewish community, being taken out and introduced as his girlfriend. And yeah, all his friends just knew me as, oh, Lily's girlfriend. And he'd joke with my husband, she may be your wife, you know, but she's my girlfriend. And he would just say, hey, you want her, you can have her. And so it would go on. So yeah.
Yeah, and you do mention in the book that prior to him actually going to Auschwitz, he was a bit of a playboy in his youth. So I'm just wondering if one of these pictures on the front is him,
Yes, it is.
As his younger one. As any of those ones?
The one in the middle. That's him in the middle there.
This one?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
There should
I'll
be one
put it up a bit
there.
closer.
He and Gita is a young couple on their honeymoon. It might be in the back.
Mm.
I'd explain those 2 elderly women down the bottom are. I'll let you know who they are in a little bit. They're significant.
They are significant?
Yes, they are.
I think I might have a question for that, but I might leave that towards the end.
Okay.
I think it's more of an end question. If it's the two ladies that I think they might be, I was going to ask you a question about that as well too. So
let me just tell you what the third reason for writing this book is. Other than people, when I meet them in person, wanting to talk about Lale and my relationship, there was something else that continually was said to me when I was meeting people after I'd been talking. And so many of them used the same word, and that word was regret. I regret that I did not talk to my mother, my father, my grandparents, my uncle, my aunt, my siblings, because I knew that there was more to them and I never asked them about it. And how often do we hear about someone really, really close to us who we've known for a long time, and we hear about them and stories about them at their funeral? And that was what I was hearing. I regret that I never asked them more. And so that's the other reason for the book, is to give some people a few sort of tips on how to find that person you want to ask about and how to engage with them, how to shut up and listen, because that's all it is. Give them the opportunity to be openly vulnerable with you and tell you whatever it is that you know they've been holding on to. Trust me, guys, you'll be the ones who will be rewarded from having just shut up and listened. You will get to know somebody at a deeper, deeper level, and it even could be your own parent.
Because you can see, like your description of Lale, initially he was telling things quite clinically, because I imagine that would be a very, very difficult thing to talk about. I can't even imagine how distressing it would have been, let alone actually reliving it and sharing it. So that enormity of trust I think what you said it before is that, oh, you're normal like me. And I think being able to open up to somebody who isn't perfect, who, has, the same sort of insecurities and things that lots of people have, it's probably a little bit easier to open up with, because you see through all of it how you and Lale cope when things get a bit tough in the conversations. And things do get tough when you're talking about things that you generally aren't open knowledge or openly discussed. And one of the things was pets.
Yes.
Can you tell us about the dogs?
Well, they were probably the main reason that I got to tell his story. Look, he had these two dogs, and the first day I met him, when I knocked on the door and he opened the door, and he stood there with his head down, and there was two dogs, one either side of him. And one of them, Tootsie, was the size of a small pony, and the other one, Bam Bam, was smaller than my cat. And the entire time I knew Lale, Tootsie and Bam Bam were in our lives. We walked them so many times. When we were in his apartment, they came to him with a tennis ball, and he would just take it out of their mouths, throw it over his shoulder, and they'd fight for it. Tootsie always won. However, one day, and it wasn't long after he'd actually met my family the first time, sitting down talking to him, and Tootsie came up with a tennis ball, and well, Lale reached down to take it out of her mouth, and she growled at him. We were both shocked. I'd never heard these dogs bark, let alone growl. And she's a big dog. She had a big, deep growl. And he kind of gave her a clip over the ear and said, give me the ball, Tootsie. And she growled again. Then she turned around and she put her head on my knee. We both looked down at this dog's mouth. I put my hand down, put it in her mouth, held onto the ball, and she released it. I threw it over my shoulder, and the two doggies went and fought for it. Lale and I watched all this, and then he turned to me and he went, my doggies like you. I like you. You can tell my story. And that was the moment the light got flicked. The switch was on, and Lale was now talking to me at a totally different emotional level.
What a beautiful story, and a beautiful way to start that. And so it also comes to, you say that about patting the dog when it got a bit stressful, is that the hand would just reach down and pat the dog. And I don't know, I don't have dogs, but I have a cat, and it's the same kind of thing. Yes. They're a really good grounding method when things get a little bit tough.
Yeah, because those dogs always lay at our feet. And so when they weren't chasing the ball, they were there. And as you say, I knew when Lale was getting particularly distressed, because I'd see his hand slide off the table and he'd start patting and stroking the dog. And I could see him then starting to settle. It soothed him. There then came times when I did the same thing, because you can imagine hearing his story. And by the way, you get about maybe 35% of his story in the book. The amount of evil, horrific things that he experienced and witnessed. There was no point in telling it all. You get the snippets of it, you get the picture. But I heard it, I know it. So I found those dogs my comfort for the same reason. And he would look at me when he saw that happening, and he'd go, "You okay? Should we take the doggies for a walk?" And I went, yeah, just go for a walk. Get the leads, and off we'd go.
And it's beautiful self-care, because that was one of the things of looking after yourself and listening to yourself and your needs is really important. And like you said, this is a very distressing topic that you're hearing about. It's not light. It's extremely distressing. To hear those things being told out and know that they were real. What else did you do to look after yourself?
You've got to remember also that we had this beautiful love story that he just kept, of course, every day as much as he could, wanting to talk about Gita. And trust me, I certainly encouraged that, because it was, to have that story to weave into his survival in Auschwitz-Birkenau, well, it makes a difference. I think it makes the story relatable. Hey, listen, by the way, I've actually met many other couples who also, elderly couples in other countries, who said, we met in Birkenau too. So while it seems that I've been criticised for indicating that relationships could form in this evil, horrific place. They did, and Nutty and Geeta's wasn't the only one. It's the one that's been written about. And I'll come back to the question, the sec though, Kathy, because you've got a picture, Birkenau in particular, as this ginormous camp. It housed at any given time over 100,000 people. So it was all this big camp. Now there would have been only no more than at any time, I've read 100 SS there guarding 100,000 people. And most of them were around the edges, around the big towers. So these people were a community. They were a community of sorts. So they needed to gravitate toward each other. They needed to develop friendships. Yes, the men and the women were kept apart in most areas, but there were other parts too where they did work together and they crossed over. And there were people like Lale and Geeta and Cilka who had what were, yes, they're considered privileged positions there. We don't get to judge them for having that. We do not get to judge them for choosing to stay alive by doing something that not everybody else was doing. Because here's another thing. Everybody there was working for the Nazis. If you were building the block or building the crematoria to carry out the deeds that they did, you're working for the Nazis. You're numbering. That's what Lale called the tattooing, by the way. He never used the word tattooing. He called it numbering. You're numbering people, or your Geeta working in the admin block, recording all the people coming in. You're working for the Nazis. But yes, there were certain prisoners who had an extra privilege in terms of, well, a little bit of extra food. And maybe they got to wear warmer clothing if they worked in the Canada, the girls. But I've already used those words, do not judge once. You're going to hear it from me a couple more times, okay? Because to me, it's a central component to ever reading a story of anyone who survived the Holocaust or any horrific genocide or period in history. Now, I've forgotten your question.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say in response to that is that they didn't choose. They didn't choose to stay there. They didn't choose to work there. The choice was taken from them. So I make no judgment on anything. I just think that, you know, it's a sad story, and it's a sad tale that is better than, you know, the other things, or slightly more privileged. Neither of them seem privileged to me. All of them seem fraught with danger and fraught with difficulties that, you know, no one had an easy ride. It doesn't matter which way you look at it.
There's no guarantees there, trust me.
And
but then it's interesting because I've done a lot of research now into the different countries that people were sent to Auschwitz from. And the Jewish people from Slovakia were the very first. It was Jewish girls in the very first transport in March 1942. 999. In fact, here's a book I'm kind of looking at. It's called The 900. And this is a book written about the first 900 girls taken from Slovakia. It's fascinating. But yes, they took the girls, and then they started taking the young boys. By young girls, I mean 15 to maybe early mid-20s, and like Lale, the boys, in April. They thought they were going to work for the Germans. That's what they were told. And yeah, often them find themselves in this evil, evil place. There was no way they could have known that, because it didn't exist before then as this evil place. So for them to survive from March, April 1942 to January 45, and yeah, and that's just those people from Slovakia. And I don't separate them out because I'm really attached to them. And I'm an honorary Slovakian, by the way. But they were there the longest. They had to create and carve their place in that horrific place.
Yeah, yeah. There's no words for it. And that's what I think that the question was looking after yourself. What did you do to look after yourself so that you didn't bring it on your shoulders?
Well, I did for a period, and I should have known better, because I knew the work I did for 20 years. I knew that you can only help somebody by empathizing with them. Don't get me wrong, you empathize with them. And I can do that very easily, as I did with Lale. And when we were going through that period when he was totally breaking down and telling me his story, yeah, a lot of it did what's called transfer. It's a condition that happens to people in the mental health field when you're hearing so much pain and trauma and guilt. Yeah, every survivor I met had guilt to different levels. Well, it can transfer onto the person hearing. And it did happen to me, and I wasn't aware of it. I didn't pick it up initially. And I'd be going home, and my family would greet me with, "How's Lale? How's Lale?" Well, previously, I've been giving them sort of a blow-by-blow description of my time with him. And now I was just saying, "He's fine. He's fine." But ask me more, and I go, "He's fine." And I was talking to a colleague at work one day and just saying, "Oh, I'm just struggling to go and see Lale this evening. Don't think I can handle it right now." Well, she smacked me around the head and she said, "Oh, for goodness sake. It's a classic case of transference." And then she reminded me, "You have no right to own any of his pain or his trauma. It is not yours. You do not get to own it. You help him by allowing him to leave him." And I could see him changing. It was incredible because as I was feeling down being with him, he's starting skipping around the lounge room and he's now cracking jokes and becoming this very different person. And I went, "Yeah, you're right. Of course, not mine. How dare I even think that I can own any of it?" So my strategy for coping was to leave him, and leaving Lale every time, he would just take me to the door, kiss me on both cheeks and say, "I will see you to your car." And by that he meant as I'm going down the one flight of stairs to get to my car and walk down the little side path, he would race to the balcony that overlooked the street where my car was parked. So he could see my car. And he and the doggies would be there on the balcony and he'd be waving. He goes, "See, I see you to your car." So I did have to get into my car and drive away. Well, I just drove to the next street and I just sat there. I would sit there for 10 minutes in my car and I would just center myself. I would reflect on what I had heard that was distressing, remind myself it's not my distress and my pain, and then say, "I have a family I need to go home to and be the wife and mother." And we did 10 minutes is all it would take for me to get back to being centered into me. So yeah, if you are dealing with living folks like this, there are two things. Find that way of looking after yourself, but also be aware of the person who's talking to you and be aware of their body language, because their words won't give it away, but their body language will give away when it is time to stop the conversation, to shut them down. And I never, ever left Lale back in the 1940s. Trust me, I saw him go there when he's talking to me. But I knew before I left him, I had to shut him down, bring him back to time and place, get him back into the apartment where he was with his doggies and what was he having for dinner or what was happening. Talking about sport was one thing we could do.
Yeah, he certainly loves his sport. And I have to say, to lighten the mood a little bit, tell us about the coffee.
Oh, he made the worst coffee ever. You know, he never asked me if I wanted it. He never asked me how I liked it. And from day one, when he and those doggies had opened the door and just turned around, he said the word "come," and they just turned around and disappeared, walked into this lounge dining room. He pointed at a chair and just went, "Sit." And so I sat and he and the doggies disappeared, leaving me going, "Dum-da-dum-dum-da." And they reappeared a few minutes later with the first of the many, many bad cups of coffee. I was really delighted as our relationship developed and I could get around there and the first thing I'd say was, "Feel like a coffee?" And he goes, "Kettle's on." I went, "How about we go out?" And so we started going out for coffee because where he lived in Melbourne was surrounded by the most amazing cafes and cake shops. And I let him drive me once, folks, and then I decided, no, my life's too short for this.
Yeah, the stories in here about the driving. Yes. A little bit scary, and I like the idea of where he parked as well too. I thought that was quite clever. I always park here. Yes, yeah. So he's certainly a character, and I don't know if you've been able to get your hands on any of those wafer biscuits or anything that were not like the coffee. They were actually quite tasty.
Yeah, wafer biscuits. They always came with the coffee. Every time I have a book launch anywhere, anytime I'm having anything to when I'm food is being provided. As some of the talks I do, there's a bit smaller, and so there's a tea and coffee and biscuits sort of put on before or after. I always send out the word, can you make sure there's wafer biscuits there, please?
Yeah, yeah. It's a big part of that connection and that building. So I think I've pretty much, we have kind of, The Tattooist. Initially, that book was going to be a screenplay. And have you been in touch with Ryan Gosling yet to get this thing on film?
Oh, well, no, I haven't. Yeah, I wrote a screenplay. That's why it's taken us so long to get the novel out, because I hung on to it as a screenplay. I was pretty bloody stubborn about that. And I didn't know how to write a book anyway. And I did learn a little bit about writing screenplays. And it took my sister-in-law in San Diego, who I was visiting one year and complaining about those buggers 100 miles up the road in Hollywood, who would know a decent story if it hit them over the head. And Peggy just leaning over the table and going, oh, for goodness sake, write the bloody thing as a book and get on with that. That I then did adapt it into a novel, still not knowing what I was doing. But yeah, when Lale sort of worked out one day, well, what's a screenplay? He finally asked me. I went, I want to see your book as a film. So for him, that was like the best news he'd ever heard. A movie? You're going to make a movie about me? He danced around and then he went, who will play me? I went, I don't know. Brad Pitt's a good-looking boy. I'm a good-looking boy. You give me Brad Pitt, he told me. When I pointed out that Brad Pitt was too old, well, we then had to start going to every new release movie. Now, it helped, and I reckon this was part of it too, that said daughter, well, she worked at a big multiplex here in Melbourne. She was the event manager at a cinema complex, Village Roadshow. And she could get us into every movie. So we went to every new release movie because he needed to find the perfect person to play Lale Sokolov. Yeah, and he settled on Ryan Gosling, which was hilarious. But no, Ryan Gosling's now too old as well.
Well, we'll just have to review it when it gets closer to production time, I think, because I honestly, yes, it would make a great movie in my opinion. I think it would be a fabulous movie. So keep trying.
It's not going to be a movie.
No,
it's in
not
development.
going to.
It's in pre-production for a 6-part miniseries instead.
Ah, wow, that's fabulous. That's so amazing. Congratulations.
And I've got a Zoom in 2 days' time with the major people in the UK. It's filming got stalled, of course, by COVID.
Of course.
Yeah, very exciting. We're getting close to what they're trying to work out a COVID-safe way to film it. It's being made by a UK company, by the way, with assistance from 5 other countries, and probably being filmed in what was going to be Poland. Still might be Poland. Hungary are offering there as well, because we want the landscape. It's crucial that we have the landscape. So right now it's just, we're getting to that point with the scripts and the development and the pre-production. So yeah, 6-part miniseries coming to a little screen near you.
Yay! Oh, that's such good news. You are going to be one very busy person, because there is also, we mentioned the picture of the 2 ladies in the front of the book, and I'm not sure, because I was going to ask you how the book was progressing with the story of the 3 sisters. Now, were they 2 of the sisters?
It's 2 of the sisters, yes.
Yeah. So how's that going? Have you got that on its way?
Oh, squeeze all my research papers and notes, and what is that? Sibby's testimony, and there's Magda's path. Yeah, let me just look. I'm always delighted to talk about 3 sisters, in particular how this story came to me, and it's like so many stories have come to me. This Kiwi girl who lives in Aussie now and is actually a naturalised Aussie was in Franschhoek, South Africa in June last year. I was there at a book festival. Now, Franschhoek is the wine region in South Africa, and they have really nice wines. I'm just putting that out there. And I was taking part in this book festival for about 4 or 5 days, and I got back to my hotel room one night, and I wasn't tired. And I'd been at a winery, but clearly I hadn't drunk enough because I wasn't tired. Anyway, I opened an email. I thought, I'll have a look at some emails, and I opened one in particular. And it was written to me, I'm reading this in South Africa, written to me by a man who lives in Toronto in Canada. He was on his way to visit his mum, who lives in Tel Aviv. and he picked up a copy of the book at Toronto Airport to read on the plane. All I can say is thank you, Canada, for having the same cover that we have here in Australia. Of the 55 countries who have published The Tattooist of Auschwitz, only Canada and Brazil have the same cover and taken our cover. Every other country has its own. Just amazing. I have some incredible books covers here. Anyway, he gets to his mum. The next day, he takes the book out to read in her lounge room and puts it down on the coffee table. And his mum walks past, looks down at the cover, and he's writing this in email to me. He said, she looked at the cover and just said, that must be about Lale and Gita. And she knew that because she looked at the number on the arm of the girl. And then she looked at the number on her own arm, and it's 3 away.
Oh.
She knew that her older sister Sibby's was only 2 away. Gita had visited her and her sisters in Israel in the 80s and 90s. You okay there, Marley? These 3 young girls, 15, 17, and 19, they came from the same town as Gita. They knew Gita. They went to school with her. 2 of them were on the train with her going to Auschwitz in April 1942. Now, it's not just another Holocaust story, folks. Yeah, of course, I'm going to take you back into Auschwitz-Birkenau, and you're going to hear about these young girls. Not a 25-year-old man like Lale, but 15 and 17 and 19, and their survival. Stories that you will never hear or read anywhere else, because every single Holocaust survivor had a different experience, saw and witnessed things differently. There are no 2 stories alike. Even these 2 sisters that were taken initially together, their stories in there are different because they got given different things to do, which means they saw different things. So you will hear about them, and you'll hear about their sister Magda coming in later. She didn't go with them because she was a little bit unwell. They knew the girls were being rounded up in Slovakia. They were on about the 3rd transport, and they heard about the town next to them, how they'd rounded up all those girls. Magda, she's the middle one, she had a bit of a fever, and her mom had called the doctor to see her, non-Jewish doctor, and he said to her, the parents, well, not the parents, it was the mother and the grandfather. The girl's father had died when, well, the youngest was 3. And he said to her, let me take Magda to hospital. Let me see if by having her in hospital, I can save her. They thought that Livia, at 15, would be too young. They surely wouldn't take a 15-year-old. Now, 19-year-old Sibby, well, she was actually out in the forest. She was training to become, she wanted to go to Palestine. So she was out training in the forest with a bunch of other young Jewish people. And so they thought that they could escape. If Livia's too young, Sibby's not at home, let's put Magda in hospital. So she was there, but however, the Cilka guards in Slovakia, well, they said no, Livia was going to go. Word got to Sibby, and she came home and said, my little sister's not going anywhere without me. So these 2 girls found themselves there in as I say, April 42. And then Magda, gosh, it was actually 2 years later. And so Magda has this totally different path of her in Slovakia, trying to stay safe, stay hidden. Incredible story on its own. But they did find each other in Birkenau. Their escape from the death march in January 1945 should be a book on its own. These 3 sisters and a handful of other girls who decided rather be shot in the back than spend another day under the control of the Germans. And so they ran. And for 4 weeks, they traveled through the forests of Poland and Germany to be able to make it safe. The Germans, the Russians, everybody threatened them. They're hiding in the forest, and the people they came across, well, look, they're scary stories, and they're wonderful stories. There's stories of how these young girls, and they all were young girls, when confronted with something where they had to make a decision, do we do the right thing or the wrong thing? Well, what's our moral compass telling us? We have to do the right thing. But it doesn't end there, that they finally did make it to the Allies, and well, they were in that part of a camp where, well, the Americans were there and the British were there and the Russians were there. And because of their language, they got shafted over to the Russian quarter and sent home to Slovakia, which Possibly could have been all right, but it doesn't end there. They're now rejected by the country that they called home. So what do these young girls do? They get together with a handful of other Holocaust survivors who made it back, a handful of the thousands. And they went and they met up with a couple of people who had not been in the camps, but they were Jewish men who had been more partisans and fought with the Russians. And so they knew how to fight. And they went into the forest in the part of the Czech Republic. And for 3 months, these young Jewish boys and girls trained. They trained how to survive on their own in the forest. They got hold of a truck and they learned how to drive. And they got hold of guns and they learned how to shoot. And then they made their way through Slovakia, communist-controlled Slovakia, through Romania, communist-controlled Romania, and they got to the Black Sea, and there they boarded a boat, and they got off in Haifa. As Palestine and Israel were being, Palestine was being taken away, wasn't it? Now, I don't make a judgment call on what the United Nations did in 1948-49 and taking a piece of land, a desert piece of land from one people, one tribe, and giving it to another. But these 3 girls now found themselves as being part of the founders, the creators of the State of Israel. And I'll tell you about that, not from the perspective of the government and the United Nations and the politicians and the military, but 3 young girls. So that's the story of 3 sisters, 2 of whom are still alive. Olivia, she's 94, Magda's 96. I spent a week with them in June, because when I got that email and I contacted my publishers in London and I said this story, and I spoke to Olivia on the phone when I was in Cape Town, and I said to my publisher, Kate in London, I need to go to Israel and talk to these girls. And a couple of days later, I was in Johannesburg and she rang me and she said, yes, you're going to Israel. Everything you've read said to me, you're going there. And I went, I'm going home to Melbourne tomorrow. So I'll go home and then I'll arrange it. And she said, no, you won't. We're rerouting you. You're going from Johannesburg to Tel Aviv. And I remember saying, Kate, I can't go. And she said, why? What's the problem? I said, I've run out of clean knickers. You know, I had timed it perfectly. And she said, never mind, learn how to wash or go and buy some new ones, but you're going to Tel Aviv. And I spent a week there with them, and I was back in Tel Aviv in January this year, spending more time with the 2 sisters and the 3 amazing families, and so honoured and humbled to be given their story. And wow, what a story, folks.
And it's amazing. If you had have come home, you may not have gotten back there.
Exactly.
How were we to know that we were going to have borders closed and, you know, flights stopped and things like that? So I think that, you know, you were flexible, you reacted really quickly, and you got the story.
Yeah, and I bought some clean knickers. Yeah.
Yeah, you got there.
Girl's got to do what a girl's got to do.
Exactly. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Anything you'd like to ask Heather? Well, we've got her here while she's not busy writing screen scripts for the 6-part mini-series. And
I'm not writing that, trust me.
No.
No. They're professional screenwriters who write that. I do get to approve them, though. I'm the script consultant. So nothing will go past me without my approval. And I've had to disagree on a few things already. There can be no deviation from the depiction of the characters, in particular of Lale and Gita. Won't have that. So, but look, the people making it, they're, as you imagine, being British BBC producers, etc., they're very good at making these kinds of stories, which is why we went with them and not the feature film offers that we did receive. Oh, thank you, Danielle. You know, you've got to say, calling me a storyteller there. I kind of always told stories, but not always written them. Well, I didn't write them at all until I was, 65. I wrote my first book. But somebody was asking me, have you always been a storyteller? And I went, well, it's not the phrase my family used to describe me growing up. And I think even my family here, to them, I was a bullshit artist. And I love telling stories. I never had the patience to write them down until I got older. But
yeah, I think also too, you are a storyteller because you tell the stories, but you're also a story keeper. I think that you keep the stories from people and you share them, but you actually are looking after those stories for them. And that's an important role with the film script of sort of keeping it true to the story that you were told.
Oh, absolutely. And as I've hinted, you don't have all the story. Some of it because, well, there were things that happened that I could amalgamate with Lale, but there were also many things that he told me, and he would say, this is between you and me. And he did not want it to be written down anywhere or told to anybody else. And so there are a lot of his story, which I will take to my grave, rightly or wrongly. I respected his wish to not write in certain things, not talk about certain things. There's just so much evil that you want to know anyway.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to a conclusion, unless anybody's got anything else they would like to add. I'm just going to say this is a delightful book. It's nice to finish on stories that focus on hope and of doing something constructive, of being able to listen actively and sincerely to what people have to tell us. And there's so much in the world that we don't know, and you don't know until you know, until someone tells you.
Well,
So,
can I give you one more story of hope to go on?
sure.
One of the other reasons that book has been written, I actually have a website called Your Stories of Hope, and we invite people all around the world to write in a short story of something that maybe have happened to them. Generally, it's something that's dark or tragic, and then share with us where they found the hope to get through it. And this book was written before this email I got, and I get hundreds of these emails. I've had thousands. I've had a couple of incredible ones in the last 24 hours. But a few months ago, I got an email, and this is very topical because it relates to what's going on with the world right now with the pandemic. And by the way, I wrote this book before the pandemic, and that part that you talked about in the front, when I refer to what's been happening this year, that was a quick addition just before the book went to the printer. When I felt I wanted to acknowledge, what a shit of a year we had. And this was back in May, and it got worse. Well, for us in Melbourne, it did anyway. But from the bushfires to the floods to the pandemic to all the deaths around Black Lives Matter, it just needed to acknowledge that. But a few months ago, I got an email from a 20-year-old young man in Milan, Italy. And Italy got hit really hard by COVID really early on. That was the country that wham, bam, and the rest of the world had to sit up and take notice and go, what's going on? This young man wrote to me, I think it was about May or June. He had been in his apartment for months, I think 4 months. He hadn't left his apartment. He lived there with his parents and younger sister. Twice a week, one of his parents were allowed to go out and get food. Otherwise, he hadn't left. And he said that all around him, friends, neighbors, and family were dying. COVID was killing them in their hundreds. And there wasn't a day that he didn't hear about the death of many people he knew. On the day that he lost his 4th grandparent, all 4 of them, he sat down to have dinner, and he said to his parents, I'm not eating. Why bother? We're all going to die. There's no hope. Look what's happening. Because they were grieving again the loss of a grandparent or the parent of one of his parents. His 16-year-old sister got up and went to her room, came back with the Italian version of the Tattooist of Auschwitz. He wrote to me and said, I haven't slept while I finished this book, which was an hour ago. Thank you for giving me hope. Thank you for telling the story of Lale and Gita and Cilka. Because of them, I know I will leave this apartment. I know I will have the best life I can, because I will live the best life I can to honor all those people who I know here who have not survived COVID. 20-year-old young man. And these are the stories that come to me. These are the stories of hope. Why do I know so much about hope? Because there wasn't a day in all those 20 years I worked in the hospital that I didn't hear that word said multiple times. I hope I can hang on long enough to walk my daughter down the aisle in a few months' time. I hope my mum can hang on long enough to be able to see her first grandchild. I hope. We dream about things, but we hope for a future. And I think it's the most beautiful word in the English language. I hear it every day. I use it every day. So I hope everyone here tuned in today has a wonderful Christmas, New Year, and let's kick this bloody year 2020 to the curb on the 31st of January. And let's go again, 2021. It's going to be a good one, love. My arm's already out waiting for that vaccine.
Okay, so I think we're just about all done now. We've run out of time. We've had beautiful stories. We've had sad stories. We've had so much fun and discussions, and thank you for writing Stories of Hope. If you would like to purchase a copy, make sure you check out our independent booksellers on the Central Coast or wherever you are in the world, because there's so many different places that people are tuning in from.
Marlene can't buy it just now, I can tell her that, but you drop me a line, love, and I'll take care of you. Okay, stay safe, everybody.
Thank you so much. And I'll just finish on a quick note about staying safe as well too. It is a pretty tough topic. So if you need support, just make sure you give someone a call, like Lifeline on 131114, just if you need that extra little bit of support. But otherwise, read Stories of Hope and get some hope in your life. And thank you so much, Heather, for joining us today.
Wow.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Kathy.
Bye.
Kathy, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would say in Slovakia, Jacqueline. Jacqueline.
Jacqueline.
Yes.
I look forward to hearing all about the new book and watching the screenplay. And thank you so much for your time today. It was just amazing.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a lovely Christmas.
You too. See you. Bye.